Let's talk about the word baronetcy, which appears in this passage that you're looking at, and many people have a lot of difficulty with this word. I've copied the dictionary.com definitions here. The first one is the definition for baronetcy. It just says the rank or dignity of a baronet. So obviously the next thing we do is we look at the word baronet, which I've also copied here from dictionary.com. In Britain, a commoner who holds the lowest hereditary title of honor, ranking below a baron. Now, if you don't read this definition carefully, if instead of reading the full definition you just look at a couple words, which is the exact wrong way to look at a definition, you might incorrectly think that a baronet is someone who has a very low level in society. Why? You look at a word like lowest, and you look at a word like commoner, and if you look at just words instead of actually understanding what you're doing, you'll think that it's a low commoner. In other words, like a serf, just a gutter urchin, some very low-level person who has very low social class. But if you actually read this properly, you'll say it's the person who has the lowest hereditary title of honor. Hereditary title of honor is like being a duke or a prince or a baron or a count. It means that you have a title, like a fancy title, that gets passed down to your child, or can go from to your daughter to your son, whatever. Baronet is someone who has a fancy title that's passed from father to son. It's less fancy than other super fancy titles, but it's kind of like buying the cheapest Lamborghini. Yeah, maybe it's cheaper than other Lamborghinis, but it's still much more expensive and much fancier than normal cars. A lot of times we get caught up and don't understand that a lot of these things are purely symbolic. Having a baronetcy maybe at some point in the far distant past meant that you had lands and servants and soldiers and all that kind of stuff, but at the time that this is written and in the modern time, it's mostly just an empty title. It doesn't really mean anything other than you get to be fancy. So we'll use an example. We'll talk about knights. When most of us think of a knight, we think of this. But today, if someone is granted a knighthood, they don't get this. It's not like they become this guy with metal on a horse and all that. Here's an image of the great singer and songwriter Sir Elton John, who's been given a knighthood by the Queen. A knighthood just means he's been given. It's been told that he's very well respected and considered to be a great national treasure by the Queen of England. It doesn't mean he rides on a horse and cuts people down with a sword. He still does what he does. He sings and writes music and plays songs. And you can clearly see that having been given a knighthood doesn't mean that he starts doing this. He still does this. He still is a musical performer. So a baronetcy just means being a baronet, and a baronet is what? It's just a fancy title to have. It doesn't really have any meaning other than it's just kind of, prestigious. It's just kind of cool to have a fancy title.